This is on approaches to conflict in theory, part 2, and Michael's going to start us. So, great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, so my name is Michael Chadukiewicz. I do community research, and I like to use grounded theory. And grounded theory is like really abstract, and it's kind of how I think. I use the metaphor that grounded theory for me is a lot like how I cook. Like I'll start to make a stroganoff, I want to end up with some Mideastern dish. It's just whatever inspires me. Never, as Charmaine says, we just let it come out, let the data emerge. So when I started to do a literature review for my project, I didn't really know where to. First of all, I didn't want to do a literature review. I said, okay, Charmaine says we shouldn't do a literature review. And my chair, no, you're doing a literature review. So I said, all right, I'm doing a literature review. How do I organize it? And so what I started to look at, well, I developed this kind of analyst method called, I call it egg in a box. And what I did is I based it on social, oh, that's not working. I based it on social cubism, something that Burns and Carter came up with to study conflict in Ireland and Quebec, and they were ethno-territorial. So, and the kind of the metaphor they came up with was so we had 6 factors that influenced these conflicts, these territorial conflicts, and we're going to put them on this side. And they said a Rubik's cube because I could never do a Rubik's cube, but as you move them, things change. So you might have religion and then it ends up over there with history for a little while. So it's really hard, right? You have all these sides of a conflict. They really interplay with each other. So I really like that metaphor, and I liked how it was organized. For me, it was okay. I could get behind this. I could look at any conflict with these factors. And then one of my professors, McKay, happened to publish a piece on cubism, and she said, well, I use it for social conflicts because it's so adaptable. So this is how I kind of got into it, and I started by looking at Hobby Lobby. And I liked Hobby Lobby was a Supreme Court case that really was one of the first challenges to Roe v. Wade. And it was also kind of reinforced corporate as individuals. So it was really much like an ethno-territorial conflict. So it really applied well. But kind of like when I got into it, I'm like, well, I'm still left feeling like I need something more. So more was, we just left the presentation. Jeremy was talking about Mayor Dugan, and I was like, God, somebody else is talking about it. And so I liked it because, you could take, and the way I looked at it was, I said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at these different sides of a cube, and the side that really interests me, I'm going to delve into a little deeper using this. So that's how I first applied it. So Dugan kind of looks at, instead of the sides of a conflict, she kind of looks at layers of a conflict. She uses this nest. So when I was looking at Hobby Lobby, I said, okay, here's a woman. So it was about insurance. This very wealthy man didn't want to pay for birth control. So really issue specific from this theoretical woman's point of view, because I don't want to generalize. Maybe women feel differently, and I'm not a woman. So, but I had this theoretical woman, and I said, well, it's really a financial issue for this theoretical woman, right? She can't afford birth control, and she can't afford to take a year off from work because, then she's not going to have, so she has to take birth control for economic reasons. So again, this theoretical person, very issue specific, but from a relational standpoint, she came from a family that believed that birth control was a moral issue. So she had, this relational conflict going on also. And then if we look at structural, and Dugan kind of divides it into subsystems and systems. So I looked at a subsystem of, well, again, kind of going back to the economics. I'm an MBA, by the way, so I look at a lot of stuff from economic point of view. From economics, we have inequality in wages. And so that really plays into this conflict too, right? And then from a structural system, you have just misogyny in general. So it's just not wages, it's social promotions and other problems women face in the workplace. So for me, this was like a really cool model, but I wouldn't have gotten here until I really looked at the whole financial piece from the cubism side. So when it came time to do my dissertation, and I was forced to do a literature review, I said, okay, I'm gonna do a literature review. And my dissertation was the impact of, I keep forgetting I have two screens. My dissertation was on the impact of social justice advocates on public policy. So now I started to say, well, let's look at the flexibility of this model. So I started to change the model, started to make it my own. And one of the things I didn't like to do is I don't like to separate politics and religion. Because they're just belief systems, and then you're excluding a whole bunch of other people, because I know a whole bunch of people that don't pay attention to politics, they don't pay attention to religion, but they're very firm in their values and their belief system. So I think I changed the values and beliefs to really encompass all of that. Okay, and then so now I have a little room to add another subject, and since I work with PURGE, again, that stands for Program for Recovery and Community Health. Community health is really important to me, so I put public health up there. Let me look at this public policy from a public health view. And then I also changed, what else did I change? We had demographics, economics, history. Oh, I got rid of the psychocultural, because I have to admit, I never really understood it that much. So, and I just like to keep things simple. So I just went with cultural. So now I started to do my literature review, and I kind of looked at these different aspects of advocacy. And I would like to say that these particular advocates that I was studying were advocating for changes to our food policy, especially to address food insecurity. All right, and again, this is really flexible, and it allows me to integrate other theories. So when I looked at history, I looked at what's called food regime theory. And what food regime theory does, it explores Britain and then the United States' use of food to gain world dominance. And I was able to take this worldview and really apply it right down to, well, how did that affect New Haven, and how are we still looking at it today? So the other thing about cubism I did is I really looked at it as kind of like this top-down approach. Let's look at the macro and kind of focus in, almost like I did with the Hobby Lobby. And then once I get focused in, then I could, and I change it nest to an egg, because I like that metaphor of the egg, because again, it's layers, but it's kind of another dimension. And I like the fluidity of the egg. These issues just kind of blend from one to another. And so what I did is I looked at, you can see food insecurity was that issue specific. And then when I looked at relational, I looked at Yale. Yale has a huge, I could have wrote it just like a dissertation on college towns. Like Yale has such influence on New Haven and everything that happens in New Haven. But the community at large too. What's the relationship of these advocates and food insecurity with the community? And then I also looked at something called citizenship, which is the part, that's what we do at PURGE. And Citizens started out as a dissertation. It's an ongoing study, and it has nothing to do with legal citizenship. It's looking at homelessness and mental illness and using 5 factors to kind of measure a person's connectivity to society. So they don't, a lot of people we work with don't even have citizenship, but we still call it citizenship. I'm going to change that one of these days. And so what we look at is a person's connections to their role in society, their relationships in society. We look at their rights and their responsibilities, and we also look at their connections to resources. So it's like grounded in a lot of social capital too. So that's the relationship piece. And then from a structural level, and again, you look at these and you say, well, why do we have COVID and racism on a micro level? Again, it's not that it's a micro level, that's where I started. I started at the bottom and worked my way up. And so I have these two kind of analytical tools that cover a wide spectrum. The other thing I did here was with the cube, that was done prior to the actual study. So during my grounded theory process, some of the things that emerged were on the egg side. Obviously, COVID wasn't on my mind when we started. But neither was really Yale or racism. These were really things that bubbled up during that grounded theory process. This is just the analytical side of it. Again, there's much more. Once I got into the dissertation, the analysis of the data, then I started to really look at people and really I looked at relationships. That was really the major theme of my topic, which isn't even here. So the major theme of the study was this group of advocates I studied was really effective in what they did because they had strong relationships, and they valued relationships above what they were actually trying to do. They were able to kind of set aside some of their values and beliefs because the value of food rose above all of that. So that's what I came up with. How much time do I have, Mike?
About 7 minutes.
All right, so what we'll do for just a couple of minutes, I started to think, well, how do I interact a little bit? And thank you, Jennifer. Too confusing. So what I did is I kind of looked at a hot topic right now, right? Bob versus E. Jackson. And I said, well, again, I get to shift it around a little bit. I'm going to put legal in there. I think we had history, and I think that really happened with Hobby Lobby. When I started talking about the history, it really ended up being the history of the legal, and it was much more than Roe. There was this whole corporate piece to it. So if I was to look at Dobbs Jackson, I'd probably go legal. Again, it's a huge public health, really big economic, values and beliefs, demographics, and cultural. And then because I haven't done the study, I kind of put a question mark on the egg. So I'm just wondering from my audience, based on what we've talked about so far, and I asked my wife and my daughter. My daughter worked for Planned Parenthood for several years. She just switched jobs, so she gave me some good ideas. But I'm wondering if what do you think are some issue specific and structural and relationship issues that contribute to this conflict? Anybody want to jump in the egg? Of course, it helps if you do a study first, but I think we've all been thinking about this. Yeah, nobody. While you're thinking about that, go ahead. What do you think?
I am an 18-year-old woman. I'm a freshman right now, and I can say that access to birth control, one, is not talked about enough. Like that, there are 50 different types of contraceptive options. So I think that there is an extreme lack of education all over the world, and I think that is one.
All right, cool. You have anything?
Yeah, I do. Just because of the position that I'm in now and the position I'm in now, I can see with my own eyes that it's a lack of education, but it's also just a lack of access personally for women of color have less access to birth control than any other group, and especially Latino women. I worked past tense in a large organization that had a Latino president, and the women that I work with don't even think they can ask for it. So I know I'm talking about relational and everything else here, just from the cultural perspective, but it's not even an option. So I would certainly say that ethnicity plays a big part as well.
I'm just reading my daughter, and my daughter again, working in Planned Parenthood, she's saying like, these physicians they're scared, and I've been reading about it, but it didn't come to mind. But, you know, they're afraid to do anything. They're afraid to give advice now because the government's controlling it. So that's definitely, could be issue specific. It could fall anywhere in the continuum, right? Anybody else want to, Michael?
I'd be interesting how you'd map. I also worked for Planned Parenthood for like almost a decade, so we saw a lot of this. But one of the things we saw is the relationship between access to contraception and intimate partner violence, which I have to assume this is going to have a radical effect on. In that when people have less access to controlled reproduction, there's increased violence in the family, specifically by male gendered people typically. And so it's what I'm thinking through when you put this up here is, you know, what is the box and what is the egg? And like, if Dobbs and if restriction of birth control is the egg, and like, what is the box? And the box is this like violent patriarchal society, which says, you know, that people can lash out violently when denied like what they feel is owed to them sexually. Or you could reverse it, right? And you could have the gendered and sexualized violent norms as the egg, and the larger system which kind of fosters and perpetuates that as the box. So that's what I was trying to think about. It's kind of so it's more a question of like, how do you model, it's not cause and effect, but it's like primary effect, secondary effect, and tertiary effect, or something like that.
Well, and that's the beauty of the model. You do whatever you want with it. It's just a model. And as I kind of came through this, you know, obviously abortion, I think Freakonomics, like when I read Freakonomics 10 years ago, and they had this study that said, you know, they pointed to violence, like less abortions, more violence,
definitely.
more
Every study
economic.
shows.
Yeah, it's just so, yeah, so it's just really, really flexible way for me to kind of organize my thoughts prior to me getting really disorganized research that I know. So.
And the egg is not a single thing, right? Because you were using that nested theory. So the egg starts with the issue specific, but it also has the relational subsystem, larger system.
Right. You're still looking at different layers. You're going back to Dugan's model and saying, okay, you know, so we looked at the problem from cubism. We kind of looked at the issue from the macro to the micro, and now we're saying, okay, now from the micro, let's pick, because we
The
can't.
issue is the yolk, but then
Yeah, then you have all these other. You have all these other issues that it's nested in, as Dugan would say. So, you know, food insecurity is nested in the community. The community affects insecurity, and the community is situated within a larger context, and in this case, very racist society, or structural racist society, and a society that's being impacted by COVID. And COVID was really interesting because food insecurity went up, but at the same time it went down because the people that did have food insecurity had a lot of access to resources. So
Right.
I thank you for, I'll yield my time. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Good afternoon. I'm Dale Snauwaert. I'm professor of philosophy of education and peace studies at the University of Toledo here in Ohio. My talk today, I have to say that the description in the program was for a presentation, panel presentation tomorrow. So it's, if any, and that is a focus on Cornell West's idea that justice is what love looks like in public. And we'll talk about that tomorrow with Jeff Warnke and Janet Gerson. But my talk today is related because I want to talk about justice, in particular from the question of justification, moral and normative justification, which will try to make sense of that as we proceed. So my orientation is philosophical. my work is on the interface between moral and political philosophy and educational theory, in particular peace education. And in that broad area, I focus on the nature of justice, and in particular, how to think about justice in terms of moral reasoning, and how can we develop the capacity of moral reasoning and judgment through education in the general population. And I rely here on George Lopez's framework of peace studies. He identified various dimensions of the field of peace studies, the causes of violence, methods of resolving conflict, building peace, and then the normative dimension of peace studies, which is about thinking inquiry into moral principles, values, institutions of peace. And that's where I situate my work in the normative dimension of peace studies, and more specifically, normative peace studies education. And this is my presentation today is a part of a larger work I'm focused on that I hope to finish in the near future. And it's premised upon the conceiving peace, not merely as the absence of violence, but the presence of justice. So that's the basic orientation. Justice, so when we think about justice, we're really thinking about the normative dimension of peace, normative in terms of both moral and ethical ideals and principles. And that relates to the idea of being reasonable, or an appeal to reason. And so I'm influenced here by Thomas Scanlon's conception of being reasonable is to offer reasons to others that they cannot reasonably reject. And a noted quotation from his book on the subject, he writes, thinking about right and wrong is at the most basic level, thinking about what could be justified to others on grounds that they, if appropriately motivated, could not reasonably reject. Scanlon conceives this as the foundation, really, of right and wrong, and that would include justice as well. In other words, what we owe to others is valid justification of our moral principles and judgments based upon them. And coming from both Ray Forst, the noted German philosopher, and John Rawls, of course, the famous American philosopher, we can think of this in terms of both a right of justification or right to justification, as well as a duty of civility, that is a duty to offer reasonable justification to others for our judgments and claims. So this relates to justice in that justice can be generally defined as pertaining to what we are due as individuals, what we can claim, what we are justified in claiming, as well as what we owe to others, and in terms of our social life together. So justice is both social and political in that sense, in that it concerns the fair terms of social cooperation. Establishing justice, therefore, involves offering justification for the fair terms of the organization of society. And justification, in turn, entails offering reasons. Justification is about the offering of reasons that provide justification for those principles, for those terms, those fair terms. So from the moral point of view of justice, injustice and it should be injustice and violence are not justifiable. That is, there is a primary contradiction between violence and reason, or injustice and reason. That is, injustice and reason are a negation of reason. And Gandhi indicated that at one point by stating that reason is another name for nonviolence. So this gets so we then have to think about the justification of our reasons, what reasons we're going to offer to others. And that concerns the justifiable acceptability of those reasons. So we can ask, what is the rational basis of the justified acceptability of reasons that we have a right to receive and a duty to offer others? What should be considered the rational basis of justification, in other words? And of course, these are huge philosophical questions. Historically, one possible answer to the rational basis of justification is an appeal to social custom or social acceptance. What we accept as a society, what our norms and customs are, is what is justifiable, is the basic claim there. And our principles and values are justifiable if we accept them, in other words. However, in brief, there is a distinction between acceptance and justified acceptability. Just because a group accepts a norm or a value or a principle alone is insufficient justification. As we well know, that social groups can accept unjust values and principles. So acceptance alone does not provide adequate justification. That it should be done, and that's the rub. That's the question. It should be done. Another possibility is to appeal to moral truth, the authority of some kind of moral truth, in the sense that there exists the claim that there exists an independent moral order to the universe, and that moral truth and principles of justice can be discovered through acts of cognition, comprehended by human cognition. And this has, of course, a long history of belief up to the present moment, the belief in an objective moral truth. The problem, one of the problems with that claim is that it leaves open the question of on what legitimate basis certain moral knowledge is validated. It's just, well, it's revelation, or some seer, some Platonic philosopher, king or queen, says this is the truth. In order for it to be true, it needs independent verification, into some kind of confirmation independently of the claim. And that's a fundamental problem with moral truth. So both of these perspectives lack independent criteria of justification, it can be argued. So then we are faced with the question, where do we turn? If it isn't social acceptance or some kind of moral truth that we can rely on, what is it just relative then, or is there some other appeal we can make? And in the tradition, philosophical tradition I am working in, is that we can appeal to moral reasoning itself. And I begin here with Scanlon again, and he writes, if we could characterize the method of reasoning through which we arrive at judgments of right and wrong, and could explain why there is good reason to get judgments arrived at in this way, the kind of importance that moral judgments are normally thought to have, then we would, I believe, have given sufficient answer to the question of the subject matter of right and wrong. From this perspective, we are looking to the nature of reason itself. And more specifically, we can look to the presuppositions of reasoning. And I'll explain what that means. The presuppositions of reasoning for the criteria of justification. So we don't have to go out, we don't have to go into societies as such acceptance or into some claim of moral truth, we can look at reasoning itself, our basic human reasoning, to potentially uncover criteria of justification, is the idea. And this begins with Kant in the 18th century and really the Kantian tradition to the present. Presuppositions. Presuppositions are constitutive elements of reasoning in the sense that they define what reasoning is, such that if they are necessary conditions or predicates for the very possibility of reasoning. So you have to assume or presuppose certain features that define what reasoning is. And it's analogous to the primary rules of a game, a chess, for example. Chess is defined, as all games are, by its primary rules. If you can't have chess without the primary rules. You can't have soccer without the primary rules. You can't have poker without the primary rules. So the primary rules are define what the game is. And in that analogous sense, various presuppositions of reasoning define what reasoning is. And this is a transcendental, what is referred to as transcendental presuppositions, in that they specify the necessary conditions for the possibility of a practice, or in this case, reasoning. Presuppositions can also be performative in the sense that they are given expression by a practice, in the sense that the practice is envisioned when we presuppose it. So an example would be equality. If we presume equality, that human beings are fundamentally equal in a moral sense, then what principles of justice would follow if we assumed equality? So that's a preformative presupposition. I hope this is making some sense. And this leads to, the idea of presuppositions leads to a procedure of moral construction, normative theory construction, which is referred to as moral constructivism. And examples of that are Rawls's original principle, Habermas's discourse principle, Forrest's principle of general and reciprocal justification, etc. And the idea of moral constructivism is that there's a procedure, a deliberative procedure that we can employ that employs normative criteria as restrictions, constraints on the reasons that we can offer each other. So in other words, valid justification that is constructed through deliberative moral reasoning that deploys these constraints. And the justified acceptability of the outcome of deliberation is contingent upon the validity of those constraints. So from this perspective, we don't begin with principles of justice as given by an appeal to truth or custom. We begin with presuppositional normative criteria that define the constraints and reasons we offer to justify our proposed principles and values. And that leads us to the idea of justice as fairness, championed by, or really crafted by John Rawls, the idea that the elements of fairness, fairness itself, is a presupposition of moral reasoning that can serve as the constraints on the reasons that we can offer in the process of justification. Thereby, they constitute the basic criteria for normative justification of principles of justice. And this quote from Lamartrius clearly states the importance of fairness. Speaking of Rawls, he says, perhaps the most far-reaching example of what is essential for an adequate understanding of justice is Rawls's foundational idea that justice has to be seen in terms of the demands of fairness. In this approach, the notion of fairness is taken to be foundational. It's meant to be, in some sense, prior prior to the development of the principles of justice. I would argue that we have good reason to be persuaded by Rawls that the pursuit of justice has to be linked and in some sense derived from the idea of fairness. The central understanding is not only important for Rawls' theory, it's also deeply relevant to most analyses of justice. Very strong statement by a Marxist, which I find compelling. So then we can, if fairness is the foundation of justification, then we can look to at least uncover 4 criteria of fairness that is in the philosophical literature and makes intuitive sense. Equality, recognition, reciprocity, and impartiality are at least 4 criteria of fairness. To be fair, you must recognize the other as an equal. You must engage in reciprocal dialogue with them. Reciprocity, you can't claim for yourself what you deny others. You have to acknowledge the point of view of the other, and they have a claim of reasonable rejectability if they are properly motivated, etc. And impartiality, of course. So we can ask, does the principle for justifying the principle or value, does the principle or value recognize and treat all persons as equals? We would ask. From reciprocity's point of view, does the principle apply to all effect? That is, to some one have a reasonable rejection, a reason to reject the claim. Do reasonable persons have valid reason to be rejected? And impartiality, does the principle unfairly favor anyone? Or, in other words, does it serve the common good? So moral reasoning from this perspective, from the perspective of fairness, we would seek coherence or consistency upon due reflection between fairness and our principles or values. Can we achieve and agree upon a consistency with fairness concerning our principles and values? And this applies to our ethical values as well. So upon due reflection, with do our reasons cohere with fairness? Is the basic idea. And this extends intersubjectively and dialogically to the public. And because moral reasoning, as we conceived it here, is addressed always to others. When we're engaged in moral reasoning, we're addressing it to others. And that suggests that as a matter of fairness, citizens have a right to justification and a civic duty to each other, Rawls's duty of civility, to explain and justify their preferences, their principles, their values, their judgments to others. And it is an appeal to valid principles of justice during public deliberation. So an important dimension of, okay, I'm just about done.
All right.
So an important dimension of moral reasoning is public. It is public reason in the end and public justification. So in conclusion, from the perspective of this idea of moral reasoning and appeal to moral reasoning in terms of presuppositions and fairness, the pursuit of peace as a matter of justice requires the educational development of the capacity of citizens to engage in moral reasoning and judgment, grounded in the presuppositional criteria of fairness. And that this development would be foundational, should consider it foundational to peace studies and peace studies education. I find something we lack as a society currently, the capacity to engage in moral reasoning and discourse on fair terms. I see that as a lack. There are many causes to that, of course, but one of them is a lack of proper education. An education that we don't have an education that develops the capacity for moral reasoning. Thank you.
The last presenter is joining us via Zoom. This is someone's. Online. Okay. So, Laurent, we're going to be able to see you just fine. You're going to be on a big screen, very easily seen and heard. But what I'm realizing in this particular moment is that you're going to have to look at a wall. So I do apologize for that. But I don't really.
Can you hear me?
So we can see you.
Can you
quite
hear
well.
me? So you can see.
Let me just make this bigger.
Okay.
Can you speak so we can make sure we can hear you?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Salutations from France. Thank you very much, Michael, for allowing me to connect with you by Zoom. Here in France, it's night now. The weather is quite cool, and there's a lot of mosquitoes. Can I share the screen?
Yes. Give me 1 second to just set that.
Yep. Okay.
There you go. Whoop. Now you should be able to
Not yet. Not yet.
try it now.
Yes. Let's go. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Off we go. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Laurent Chaudron. I'm speaking from the south of France in Provence, and I'm very happy to talk about peace engineering program. So this morning I received 2 posts, one from LinkedIn about the United Nations, and it was written, "We need peace," and the other one on Instagram, because I follow Instagram for musical reasons, and I saw this post, "How can we build peace if we don't understand it?" So why this talk here? First of all, I'm connected with the Plan International organization which try to help girls in countries to be educated. The other reason is because I'm a researcher in cognitive science with many subjects, just as cognition, metacognition, trust, causality, and so on. And we discovered that, in fact, something that was a kind of the top of the pyramid of all that was kind of peace engineering program, the building of peace in societies and multi-agent systems. There is another reason, because I also am an amateur and I try to play music. And if you don't know, please connect with the Playing for Change movement, which tries to share peace through music. And the other question is because I also practice fencing. So what's the relation? What are the relations between fencing and peace? This will probably be a problem that will be solved during this talk. So there will be 2 parts: the formal model of peace, on which we will try to figure out what could be the definitions from a formal point of view. What is peace? And another component is the pragmatic of peace, with what we call the 3F approach. This means the fight for fake approach. So first, we are convinced, thanks to the previous communications and the many conferences about the question of peace, that it's very complex to define what peace is. So I relate to the United Nations, of course. Peace means dignity, well-being for all, and not just absence of war. And during the 18th century, there has been some publications. First of one is about the perpetual peace by Charles-Irénée Castel de Saint-Pierre at the beginning of this century. And at the end of this century, Immanuel Kant, of course, with his perpetual peace, zum ewigen Frieden, that is supposed to be the kind of core publication on that. And if you don't know it, there's an anthology published by the UNESCO at the end of the 20th century in 1995. So peace is the concept of social friendship and harmony and so on. And in social sense, it means a lack of conflict and freedom from fear and violence. Okay, that's probably something like that. It's quite difficult to define peace without a lot of words and without using words related to conflict. It's also very difficult to represent peace. For example, to make a music or a poet or drawing that will represent exactly what peace is, it's quite complex. For example, you can see the Library of Congress in Washington. There is two walls: the mural of war and the mural of peace. Generally, if you want again to represent peace, you just have to have a kind of negation between two concepts: the war and peace, the conflict and peace. And of course, you know the logo of peace, and of course, the dove made by Picasso in 1961. And in the south of France, there's a wonderful small chapel was dedicated also the wall of war and the wall of peace. So we can say it's a rich and complex concept that is very difficult to define from a formal point of view. For example, if you use some proxemic definition, we have a very smart tool. Sorry, normally it's kind of animated lattice, but due to the problem of connections, I just show you a drawing on that. So peace is related to order, to equilibrium, to harmony, to union, to negotiation, and so on. So it's possible to use semantic correlations between this concept with other concepts, but as we can see, it's not possible to define it with 2 or 3 words. Of course, we also have a lot of organizations dedicated to United Nations, for example, the United Peacekeeping and Peace Building activity, again, the Dove of Peace. And an interesting point is that generally, at the end of the definitions, we could read a sentence like, peace does not imply the absence of conflict, but a systematically calm and measured resolution of any difficulty. So it's quite interesting to see that a way to making kind of smooth perception of conflict and to relate it to more smoothly to peace. So this is why we have been working on that for many years, including a kind of a formal approach based on logic and mathematics. There is not so many publications on that on those questions, and generally it's related to the usage of mathematics as a means to help societies to get in peace, but the way to use mathematics so as to modelize, to formally modelize the peace is not really so frequent. So some years ago, we were working on the question of defining what is a conflict between agents. between two agents, not only human agents, but also a human machine and a machine and so on. For example, when there are two computers, they have to print and use the same printer. There's a kind of access to the printer conflict. So what is a conflict? It's by the definition a set of knowledge items reporting to a set of agents, which is inconsistent, and the fact that it is not inconsistent matters. So you are struggling with your neighbor because something is very important for you, something is very important for him or her, and this is the conflict. There are many other reasons that you are there's not a consistent set of knowledge between you and your neighbor, but maybe they are not matter at all. So the idea was to make a reverse consideration of this formal modeling definitions, and we were able to define a peace and cooperation state between agents by considering that what matters to there's a subset of the intersection of the knowledge of the agents that matters, and that is consistent, and this set is a common objective of S, the set of agents, a kind of program of life that they share. So it's roughly explained here, but it was a kind of static definition. We could see that from the recent publications, there are a group of research scientists led by Larry Leibovich that are trying to make a quantitative measurement of peace thanks to a lot of parameters measuring the activity of societies. So I give you this publication. As you can see, the model is not so simple too. So peace is really quite complex to modelize. And so the idea is we currently are trying to continue to work on that based on logic and algebraic models so as to capture the real properties of the notion of peace between agents, both human agents and also artificial agents, because you can consider that some sophisticated agents could have some knowledge that could be a subject of conflict, and including war. So all contributions are welcome. Thank you for that. If you can help us to build that. This was the formal part, and just to show you what we are working on. Now the second part is the pragmatic of peace, from the both sociological point of view. So I explained you that I was practicing fencing, Japanese fencing more precisely. And why is it related to peace? Because there is a researcher, Jean-Louis Dessalles. He's well known because he made a theory of simplicity, and he pretends the invention in the Homo sapiens societies, the invention of the language is co-occurrent with the invention of weapons and the necessity of having trust so as to maintain peace. If you are weaker than the chief of the group, which is very strong, but you have the possibility to use weapons, so the weaker can kill the stronger. So the stronger has to invoke trust for the weaker, but the weaker has got weapons, and he has to use the language. So there's a combination between the peaceful activity of the group and the existence of a trust as a vivid fluid inside the group, and the fact that there is weapons and you have to use the language to have to maintain peace and trust. Okay. And more recently, you probably remember that there's a problem in London, in the United Kingdom, because there are several stabbing crimes. And a member of the parliament just 2 years ago was killed by a person using a knife. So there is a fencing instructor who said that maybe if I can help the population to practice peacefully sport, including fencing, probably that will help to prevent knife crimes. This is his theory. So let us continue on that situation. First, the constitution of a UNESCO declares that since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that defenses of peace must be constructed. Clearly, it's difficult to be against such a constitution, but the paradox is that despite a sufficient amount of culture and rational knowledge, some highly educated minds and educated persons, very clever persons, precisely use their skillful mind and the educated mind for sophisticated and deadly purpose. So there is a lack of something pragmatic on that. And some paper, you can see the references here. What would aliens wish to interact with a species as violent as an eidotic as Homo sapiens? So probably an assumption is sapiens likes violence and fight. Okay, so let us consider that as an assumption. And if you want to go further, there's a philosopher, René Girard, who is really a specialist of violence. And some artists consider that Kurosawa Akira, in this film, Ran, which is supposed to be the most chaotic end of the conflict, the destruction of all the agents on all the world is probably the ultimate violence and disorder piece of art dedicated to conflict. But there's one guy who is really interesting, is Norbert Elias. It's a controversial because he was related, I think, to the Nazi regime. And he said that sport is something that is related to controlled violence. So if Sapiens loves violence, probably something related to sport is something to be the controlled violence, la violence maîtrisée, because it has been published in French, I guess. In fact, if we look at living beings, they express this societal friendship and the absence of hostility by playing games. And these games are generally based on fight for fake. Lions, elephants, horses, wolves, bears, and even children. You're playing war, you're fighting, you're making struggle with pillows. So, in fact, if you want to express that you are in friendship with someone, you can say, "Oh, let us struggle with a pillow." So, a serious fight for fake could be a generation and proof of peace and trust. So there's also a very interesting paradox, because I spoke of Japanese fencing. And why Japanese fencing is interesting is because there was a problem during the Second World War, because the extremist Japanese officers were practicing fencing and using the famous Japanese sword. So the Japanese Federation decided to copy his motto to the Olympic words. And this is the one and only sport federation in the world that said that this practice of this sport helped to promote peace and prosperity among all peoples. So it's interesting because it's quite a unique declaration, and also it's kind of paradox, because how a discipline based on the sword and its history of wars and blood could be a path to peace. So, and of course, to friendship and to interesting competitions and so on. So it's as if there was kind of pragmatic maxims of fight for fake. First of all, it is not possible to fight for fake with one you want to kill or actually harm. I suppose it is not possible today to organize fencing or a box championship between Russia and Ukraine, or between Israel and Palestine. So if two countries or two groups are in a real conflict, it's not possible to make a fight for fake, or to make a sport and to make sport competition. And then conversely, if you're able to practice a sport competition, it means that you don't want to totally kill or totally harm the participants. The second pragmatic maxim is, if you want to fight for fake with someone or with the team, you must control your actions, including in rugby. There are something that's possible to do, and there are other things that are not allowed to do because you have to control your actions. And control your actions is a proof of your non-violence capabilities. And the third one is this control is based on two components of trust, the self-trust and the trust on each other. I accept to fight to make a sport competition with you because I trust on the fact that you will respect the rules, and so you will control your actions respecting the rules, and you will control also your action. And I know you trust me because you think that I will control my actions referring to the rules. So the serious fight for fake is related to a kind of combination of peace and trust. And for example, why? If we make some details about that, so this is the last part. Why is it possible to fight for fake and to trust? Because I can go for real. Because when you see a match of rugby or boxing, they fight for real. But this is a serious fight fake. It's a serious fake fight. I can go for real because I trust the equipment, I trust the rules, I trust my partners, and the fact that I trust the fact that you have good equipment and you will follow the rules. And as a participant, for example, you see a demonstration of two professors using real words, and they say that so they can kill each other. But I trust my partner because I know that for my other partner trusts my actions, and I know my partner trusts me. And it's the same for me. I'm confident because I'm helped for that, and there's kind of self-trust. And what is based? What is the last combination of that? Because we said that it was the trust and the real serious fake fight is based on the fact that you can control. So your action must be genuine. It must be serious, but it must be controlled. So it's general question when you use your body. When you use your body in movement and in gesture, there's always a combination of two energies, the spout out energy and the refrain energy.
You have about a minute.
Wait, yes?
You have about a minute left.
Okay, it's the end. So if you go to temples in Asia, you can see two gods. One is with the open mouth, it's agyo, the energy out. One is the closed mouth, is ungyo, the energy in, that refrain. And there's also old katas, that all styles that express that. And it's exactly what you are feeling when you're practicing any sport, including opposition sport like fencing, rugby, boxing, and so on. You must act with sincerity, firmness, and will, if this is agyo. And you must also use kindness, restraint, and attention. And this is ungyo. This is virtue. This is virtue that creates trust. So in the end, we try to defend that with Kendo teacher curriculum, including disabled persons, that allows them to practice together. And this is a kind of a path to peace, thanks to trust. Thank you very much for that. And remember one thing, that every day is training.
Thank you. Right. So we do have some time for questions.
So I have some time for questions, if I can hear them, because the connection is not so good. And if I can't understand, please, you will send me a message and I will be able to answer.
Give me one moment here. I need to stop recording.
Okay.